This episode of the AIXR podcast is brought to you by Zappar, the folks behind Mattercraft, the leading visual development environment for building immersive 3D web experiences for mobile, headsets, and desktop. Mattercraft combines the power of a game engine with the flexibility of the web, and now features an AI assistant that helps you design, code, and debug in real time, right in your browser. Whether you're a dev, designer, or just getting started, Mattercraft speeds up your workflow and brings your 3D ideas to life faster than ever. Start building smarter at mattercraft.io. Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink with Ted Schilowitz for the AIXR podcast. It's Friday, November 7th, 2025. Good morning, Ted.
Good morning, Charlie. How are you? We're Rony-less today. He's got some investor meeting or something that takes precedence, so he can't be with us today.
I was just listening to the last podcast. Rony is such a big deal.
He's a rock star.
What is he doing hanging around with us?
He's a rock star. It was really fun. We were in Florida together because I'm doing some work with him on the Synthby thing, and he's a cool cat. I enjoy spending time with him. He is a guy who, really has been through the ringer in various ways and come out okay. And he's doing interesting stuff. And, the Google sort of partnership, which I think we all knew was sort of coming in the background on the Magic Leap front, could give them a new lease on life. I'm kind of keeping a close eye on what comes of that. It's interesting.
Maybe. I think Rony goes up and down about the future of that company as a Saudi company.
Well, of course.
So,
yeah, just
we'll see. But I'm needless to say, he is rooting for them with all his heart, because the last thing he needs is for it to kind of be sold off for parts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, interesting news this week.
Yeah.
Let's hit the top story first, of course, which is that Stability AI has beat the rap.
What do you think about
Not
this?
guilty of copyright violations. There are some minor quibbles that they might win out on, but I would say 90% the case has been decided in favor of AI.
Yeah, I know Rony would actually be very up in arms about this. He is very much on the side of, looking at the past and what went wrong with content creators, content providers, and those that essentially slurp it all up. But look, playing both sides of the equation, there's an interesting argument to be made about where is the line between IP theft and IP reflection, IP learning, IP recreation, right? It's hard to find it.
Let me summarize what the judge said.
Okay.
Stable Diffusion doesn't store or reproduce the images.
Yeah.
And that kind of aligns with what James Cameron, who's on the board, has been running around saying, that the models learn rather than copy. And so there's an issue about watermarks, but the ruling is consistent with the ruling for Anthropic, that the training does have a scientific use, and therefore they're able to do it legally. But Anthropic has been fined $3 billion because they retained the copies
so that's
that they
the
trained on. Yeah. That was the nuance that tripped them up, although the judge has not yet approved the settlement. I don't know who's going to get the $3 billion or if that's going to be the actual number. Yeah. Anthropic was in a hurry to pay it, right? They were like, $3 billion, authors, split it up and see ya.
Right.
You take the $5,000 they would be offering people like me, and, I sign a thing saying they can copy them and do whatever they want.
Right.
And that's not a bad solution as a content creator from my point of view. But I don't know. It's hard to say what is equitable. Not all authors and all works are created equal.
Yeah, when you think about the sort of philosophical sensibility of this, how does it differ? And it does differ, but how does it differ from you and I in days of yore going to a physical library, looking around at all those thousands of books and materials and watching, learning, absorbing, and then creating something because I went to the library for a couple of weeks and I learned about this particular form of a snail that only exists in one place in the world, and then I created a movie about that or a TV show about that, right? That's kind of the dynamic, but when you apply a technology layer at scale and a profitability sort of output to that, that's where things get a little murky, right? So It's interesting.
So here's one that is frustrating.
Okay.
AI data centers are sucking up power.
Yeah, baby.
And in some states, like Indiana, it's half the power that the state produces.
Yep.
And this drives up the cost of the power for you and me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's a downstream effect that people don't really talk about or realize that is real and significant. Yes.
WTF, I'm not an investor in OpenAI, Anthropic, or XAI.
Right.
Why should I be subsidizing their hoggy electricity use?
Charlie, this goes all the way back to the beginnings of Silicon Valley, right? Silicon Valley, as an entity, was a taxpayer-created entity, government-oriented defense programs, science programs that built the computer industry off the backs of citizens like you and me and many others that paid our taxes into the defense industry. And private industry grew out of that, became the Silicon Valley, became companies like HP and Apple and Dell and Microsoft and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And Amazon. Jeff Bezos is actually quite open about the fact that he would not be successful without the public good of the internet. The internet was created in various forms by taxation, right? And we're in a current version of this with AI and power consumption. We enable it with our tax dollars.
Totally 100% true. Here's my quibble.
Yeah.
I'm being asked in a very direct way to pay more because of this business. Mm-hmm. So they have, in a sense, privatized the profit and socialized the risk and the expense.
Yeah.
And so I think they should, yes, power costs more when there is competition for it, and they should pay that increase, not us.
Well, if I was in the government, I would make some sort of play to say all power that's going to drive computer functionality, AI and everything else that drives computer cycles and power that runs it, needs to be, the data centers need to be co-located near or right at public power sources so that the runoff, the excess power that doesn't get used, is forced to be used first by those companies before we as taxpayers actually pay those dollars. If you're interested in this would be a sponsor for our show. We were talking about sponsorship. There's a company to learn about for our listeners called Crusoe, kind of spelled like Robinson Crusoe, the castaway. And what they have done is built a business around building data centers right next to power plants. So when, you know this, probably a lot of our listeners know this, when the power grid goes up and down, power can't be stored forever. It actually has to be used or expelled into the atmosphere. You know, if it's just generated by hydroelectricity, steam, or coal, or nuclear, or whatever it is, the power just doesn't live forever. It has to go someplace or be thrown away. And the idea is, if you're going to throw it away, allow these data companies to take that power and use it. And so this little startup called Crusoe has actually figured out that business model. I think there's
the other thing, of course, is that power dissipates.
Yes.
The longer it travels.
That's why it needs to be right next to the power plant. That's how they benefit from it.
So,
anyway,
I forgot at the top of the show to say that Tom Furness, Dr. Tom Furness, founder of the HIT Lab, and somebody who has been dealing with human factors and AR since the 1950s.
He's a legend. He's a true legend. Absolutely.
Without Tom Furness, Ted,
we would not be here today.
I would be talking about semiconductors.
Exactly. We would not be here today. That is exactly right.
So here's another story, and this is a story for Roni, and I'm not sure if it's big news or not, but some Magic Leap engineers have a company called Trace, and they are launching a codeless AR platform that lets you place AR experiences anywhere in the world. It sounds a lot like Niantic.
Yeah, I was going to say it's sort of Niantic has had its own journey, and now they're kind of public, sort of privatized, right? So it's interesting. Yeah.
So the guys' names are. We should call them out here. Maybe we should try and get them on the show since they're ex-Magic Leap guys, and they've been pushing that in the press release. I guess, of course, because nobody knows who they are. I don't even see their names in this article.
It would be interesting to.
By the way, Road to VR, shout out to them and Ben Lang and Scott Hayden, one of the best publications about XR. I read it every day.
Yeah. It would be interesting to ask our guest from last week, Kieran, who runs Illumix, to see what she thinks about Trace. Is that competition for her? Is it extending her capabilities? Do they need her to help them build a no-code solution for people like you and me, to build an AR experience, this way without having to learn any coding skills? I'm fascinated by it. I think it'll be really
glasses are coming, and we've thought that, they need location-based content.
Yeah.
So there are lots of other problems with that, notifications and so forth. How do I know it's there? Am I using an all-day headset? Am I using an intermittent headset? What is my intentionality? But we have been talking about this both on mobile phones and on headsets for 10 years.
Yeah, it's a complicated industry, lots of complications.
Yeah, and this is the entertainment software marketing layer
right.
that we're really talking about. But anyway, exciting. People still working on it. So obviously, I think timing may be better this time around.
Sure. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
So here's the other story that I'm looking forward to chatting about. Google Maps announced a major upgrade. And they are right now integrating Gemini into Maps.
Right. So it's a natural language. You and I are on a road trip and we're like, where's a good hamburger around here? And, as opposed to typing it in and being distracted and stuff. I think it's a good use case, a good application for this stuff. Where's the best T-shirt shop in Austin, kind of thing.
But you can also use it for practical things.
Right? Come on.
You're stuck on the 405 and you're like, are you positive that surface streets aren't faster to get to LAX?
Right.
And I think that would be pretty exciting to have a co-pilot like that.
It'd be cool.
I use CarPlay all the time, so I'm ready.
It'd be cool if you were a big movie executive, if that industry still exists, and you say, roll through my call list, Gemini, while I'm in the car, kind of thing.
I think that Apple's going to have Gemini too, and they're integrating it as they had previously intended to do with Siri. So it's going to operate other iOS apps.
Yeah. And I think that's a good play for Apple. I think Apple has learned a hard lesson about the things they do really, really well, which are better than most companies in the world, and the things they don't do well. And when they don't do well, they should find partners to do it with them. And that's kind of, this was their strategy with search. Google powers the underlying search of Safari and all that stuff on your phone. And that was a very successful relationship, albeit a little interesting on the economics of who gets paid what, right? And of course that we're all paying as users. But I think that's a smart play for Apple. I really do.
So we had Jason Zotto on the show last month from Secret Level, which is an AI-first entertainment marketing company, I guess we would call them. One of the new built for AI studios. And they did the Coke commercial last Christmas.
Yeah.
You remember holidays are coming?
Yeah, it was very controversial. Jason and I actually had, after he was on the podcast, he and I had breakfast and we talked about that in more intimate terms around some of the challenges he had with the AI. The release date of that Coke thing, which took so much time to build, that the models were so much better than what they actually released, and now they got another chance at the wheel at this. So it's kind of
they've released a new set of Christmas ads.
Yeah.
I think most of them, at least the one that I saw, was made by Secret Level, and it is wonderfully animated.
They're sort of Pixar-ish kind of feeling.
I loved it.
Good feeling stuff, and the tools have gotten better. So it's interesting to watch AI progress through the lens of a large commercial entity and deliverable like Coca-Cola, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a venerated global brand. It has to be right.
Yeah.
It's like Disney. Right. I think it's even better than last year's. Really, if you can't tell the difference, there is no difference. If I didn't tell you it was AI, you wouldn't even think it.
Right.
So I think that's great for Secret Level. Wow, have we come a long way just so fast.
And for everybody that's kind of, freaked out that all the jobs are going away, they still had a pretty robust staff working on
there 25 people made those over a period of months.
Okay, arguably it wasn't 250 people, right? So
exactly. It wasn't a $5 million commercial.
Correct.
It was probably a $500,000 commercial.
Correct.
Which is not no money. And they did not take no time. They took about the same amount of time.
Yes.
But the result is, in my view, equal. And the cost was 1/10 of what it would have cost three years ago.
Right. So great for, new enabling creators, tough for people that live in an old economic model, right? That exist in a way where they kind of get paid to do content in a certain way and expect a certain degree of professionalism and pay scale. We saw that with YouTube, how that sort of upturned that apple cart, and now AI is upturning a lot of apple carts and changing the dynamics of what advertisers, clients, deliverables had to pay to get a deliverable. Technology does that a lot, right?
I teach at Chapman University Film School, for those of you who don't know. And I have been shocked lately by this anti-AI wokeness, I guess you could call it. It's like a mind virus, and it is so self-defeating.
Yeah, you and I argue, that there's plenty of ways to look at this and plenty of ways to be scared of certain things and what change does. It can often scare people. But I don't see AI as any other different form of progress than other computer advancements, right? We build efficiencies because cameras became computers, because typewriters became computers, because movie projectors became computers, because how we played games became computers, right? And now we're taking it to the next level. There is a definite argument to be made that this is a very dangerous form of compute because it is making a lot of very radical change and isolating power. So when you talk about a company that, we talked for years about who will be the first $5 trillion company. Well, in reality, we've now seen that happen, right? We've seen a $5 trillion valuation for NVIDIA for a moment in time, which means it has a larger GDP than every country on planet Earth except for China and the United States. One corporation, right? And our friend Andrew Ross Sorkin writes a lot and does a lot, did Billions and a lot of these shows.
He's the New York Times finance writer.
Yes, and he is writing, or has written a book that I want to read that apparently draws a lot of parallels to the Great Depression and where we sit right now with this isolation and concentration of power in a very small amount of companies and everybody chasing wealth through those companies. And like the tip is about to fall is what he's apparently saying. So it's probably worth a look-see and worth being. So
instead of being worth $5 billion, they'd be worth $2
billion in a minute. Yeah, right. And maybe that'll happen.
It doesn't hurt NVIDIA, but it crushes the small investors.
Yeah. I mean, how many companies in the world have multi-trillion-dollar valuations? It's a very small amount. And they're all basically in the same industry. That's kind of what's so fascinating.
Let's get back to the entertainment point of it, because that's the industry. We're in LA, the industry that we know best, although I would say not limited to this industry in any way, shape, or form. The media industry is small relative to many other industries in this country.
Yeah, microscopic in terms of compared to healthcare. Yes, exactly.
Right. So, but the noise is amplified for us. I think outside the bubble, people are thinking about their job.
Right.
And whether it is being threatened. So the students at the film school are very anti-AI, and it surprises me because it's the biggest opportunity they're ever going to be presented with.
So it's interesting, Charlie, from your perspective, when you talk to the students, are they aware that their whole life, if they choose to get into this industry, into any creative industry, right, is beating the odds? Like, they're not all going to get jobs in this business. This business is very competitive. Just like, anybody that plays sports, the tiny bit of them that become professional athletes,
right.
The tiny bit of them
that were so lucky, Ted. We were so lucky.
Yeah, well, we had interesting careers, so we beat the odds a little bit,
But it's a brutal freelance business, and you end up having 40 bosses throughout your career.
So why are they blaming technology on that problem as opposed to just supply and demand?
Well, so, I mean, they're all the ones who are going to be in the industry inevitably are going to work in social media in some form. If I were them, I'd be a lot more pissed off about that than AI.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's just general anxiety about what's going to happen to me in the future.
I get that. Listen, I mean, I have kids. I get it. I understand.
But it's not AI. AI is an opportunity.
Right.
There's lots of things going on economically.
Agree. Just like computer graphics were an opportunity, just like every other advancement that we've used silicon to bring to the world is an opportunity and a growth sector. Yes, agreed.
The guest segment of the AI XR podcast is sponsored by the new Luma series of Viture XR glasses. Viture is the quiet giant of video smart glasses, preferred by gamers and #1 in U.S. sales. The expanded 52-degree field of view shows me a virtual 152-inch screen. For the best in mobile gaming and entertainment, go to luma.viture.com or Amazon and get yourself a pair. Welcome to the AI XR podcast. Ted, unfortunately, Roni's not with us today.
Yeah. We were opining about, there are very few people in our industry that we would consider legends in our industry. I actually think Charlie's a legend too. But Tom, you are a legit legend in terms of your staying power, what you've done, the importance that you have brought to our industry. We would not be doing the things that we have gotten to do in our careers around this XR bubble in various forms without you, 100%. And anybody that listens to this podcast that does anything in this industry would probably not be doing it without you. So
and of course, anybody who is flying an F-14 ought to thank Tom also.
Absolutely. Flying it successfully, right? Yes. Yes.
Well, those things are dangerous.
All right. So we just gushed on you, Tom. And why don't you, through your lens, give us a little bit about who you are for our listeners?
Hey, guys, if I'm this great, why do I have to still take out the garbage?
Yeah, well, we all have to do that, baby.
I know. Where is my flying car, Tom?
It's coming.
What could go wrong?
What could, yeah. So you guys seem to have a good time.
We do.
during this,
Every week we have
yeah.
a really good time. And our is growing week over week, I think, just because we have a good time doing this.
Okay, so what can I do for you?
Tell us about who you are. Give our
what's
listeners
the
a
Tom
sense.
Furness story.
Yeah,
I mean,
just
you've been doing this for 70 years.
Yeah,
or
baby.
So? What is up with that?
Yeah, no, only 60.
Okay. I'm 48, so I got 20 years left still.
You're never going to catch up to Tom.
That's true. You're right, 100% right.
Well, I'm just 82. I've got another 20, 30 years to go. So yeah.
I totally agree.
I hope so.
So tell me about. Well, I'm a Southern boy. I grew up in Western North Carolina, and it was a wonderful childhood. I got to play in a forest every day, and lived in a village that had a bunch of kids, and we played sandlot baseball and football and basketball, and I was sort of a nerdy kid. I mean, even though I did all those outdoor things, I was interested in science and in electronics. And my parents, they didn't know what was going on in my head, but what they did recognize is that let's just keep him in parts and equipment and let him do his thing.
Keep him entertained.
Keep him entertained.
Okay.
Yeah. But one of the pivotal points in my life was in 1957 when I was in the 7th grade, and the teacher was telling us about the International Geophysical Year. This was when all the nations of the world were going to get together and orbit some satellites in order to look down at the Earth and find out more about the Earth and so forth. And I got so excited about that for some reason and decided I'm going to start early. And I started playing around with rockets. Now, there weren't any of those you buy off-the-shelf rockets for kids, but I had a chemistry set. And my parents, the chemistry sets back then aren't the same as they are now. I mean, you could kill yourself with a chemistry set.
Yeah, and others. Yeah.
And others. That's right. And so I developed my own rocket fuel.
So this was before like the Estes rockets that I had as a kid. You built this stuff homebrew. You did fascinating.
Homebrew. And I had these great formulas. I was using zinc dust and sulfur and potassium chlorate and sugar, and mixing them together and mixing how much sugar I put in there for a retardant. And I was setting it off with dynamite fuse. My dad took me to the hardware store, and they wouldn't sell me the caps, but they would sell me the fuse. And that's how I was setting them off. And most of them exploded right there on the pad. But
you and Elon, same as Elon, by the way.
That's right. Exactly. But I was, after a while, I said, I was trying to take pictures of it with my camera, and of course, all you see was a blur. This thing was going up, and I said, "Hey, what's going on up there? I would rather be up there, finding out what's going on, rather than down here on the ground, just sort of watching it go up." So, started getting the rocket telemetry. I was building these little radios that would transmit back down, and anyhow, my teachers found out what I was doing and said, well, why don't you enter the science fair? And I did, and I won. I won the state science fair, North Carolina State Science Fair. But I was just a junior by this time in high school. They couldn't give me the big prize, which they gave the seniors, so they go to the national. But they gave me the so-called Naval Science Cruiser Award, which meant that here I was 16 years old, and I spent a week with the Navy on an aircraft carrier.
Cool.
And there were 50 of us, of course, kids from all over. And we were there with a bunch of senators were on board too. And they just did this air show in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And the Navy was trying to seduce us, to get us these nerdy kids to join with the Navy. But as a result of that, I wrote this little sort of trip report, and sent it to the Navy. And lo and behold, they published it in the Navy newsletter about this kid, was on a Navy science cruiser thing. After I got back, organizers of the state science fair found out about this thing, and they said, well, let's invite him down to do a PBS broadcast, about his projects, his rocket projects, about the Navy science cruiser. And I did. I went down to Raleigh to the PBS station and was on that. And but After that, I didn't know what was going on in the background. After that, they said, hey, we want to take you now over to the University of North Carolina and show you something. So they did. They took me over to the Moorhead Planetarium on the campus of the University of North Carolina.
Okay, so listeners, this is where the story starts to become extraordinarily relevant to our lives. So here we go.
So what happened? I walk into the Moorhead Planetarium, the big dome where they project the stars, and there was a Mercury capsule there. And I said, whoa, this is different. There's the stars up there, and there were 3 Mercury astronauts, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, and Alan Shepard. They said, these guys want to talk to you.
In the real. There they were, in North Carolina.
In the flesh.
Yep.
They were right there under the capsule.
Yep.
I asked them what they're doing. They said, well, we're learning celestial navigation. We're shooting the stars. We're practicing in case our computers, go in the frats. We have to shoot the stars to determine where we are. And so I got to spend an hour with these guys. Just me. I mean, I worshiped these guys.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be one of them. And so I asked them, how could I get to be one of you guys? And they said, well, the best thing to do is get into the military and become a pilot, and then become a test pilot, and then apply to the astronaut corps. And I said, wow, okay, I'll do that. That was my laser focus. And I got a congressional appointment to the Air Force Academy, a conditional appointment. I had to pass the physical. All the cadets did. And so I was on. It was going to happen. So I went for my physical, and if I'd been able to read one line lower than I could,
oh, wow.
I would have been at the Air Force Academy. One line separated me.
So that moment in time led you into the virtual side of all this stuff, as opposed to the physical. Let's get up into a rocket.
Well, yeah. Let me get the little
okay,
bit.
There's a couple
added
steps
to
there.
that.
The guy's 82, Ted. It takes a while
to get to there. I know. It's
right,
I'm fascinated.
So,
I think it's an amazing story.
Well, so I was crushed, brokenhearted, because that was my plan. I had no plan B. And I didn't want to go to the University of North Carolina. They didn't have an engineering program. I didn't go to NC State. That's a Cal college. I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. And here it was July, and I had no plans to where I was going to go to school. And my dad, my mom and dad were distraught as well. And so my dad said, hey, let's go down to the Piedmont of North Carolina and go visit these universities again. And I hadn't applied to anything. So by some miracle, it was a miracle. Dad took me, we were leaving town. We'd been to state, we'd been to Carolina. And he said, let's just stop by Duke for kicks before we leave town. And so this was on a Saturday now, and in July, and we landed on the campus, and Dad asked some students where the registrar's office was. And so we went to the registrar's office and opened the door in the reception room. It was full of kids and full of students, and the registrar was there. And so my dad went over and talked to the receptionist and said, my son would like to talk to the registrar. And I had my jeans on, I had on my T-shirt. I mean, all these other kids were dressed up and with their parents. And I said, Dad, this is a waste of time. This is embarrassing. And he said, yeah, it's the receptionist. And she said, well, do you have an appointment? No, we don't have an appointment. Well, all these people have appointments, and he's got to leave at noon. This is 10 o'clock now. He's got to leave at noon. We've got to visit all these people. It just isn't going to happen. And Dad said, that's okay. We'll wait. So one at a time, these kids went in with their parents to talk to the registrar. And about halfway through, the receptionist comes over to us and said, you're not going to make it. He's supposed to leave, and he's already at 12 o'clock, and there's still a bunch of kids left. So Dad said, that's okay. We'll wait. And finally, 1 o'clock rolls around, and the last kid comes out. This is 1 o'clock. And the receptionist goes in to talk to the registrar. And he pokes his head out the door and looks over across the reception area to me. And he looks at me for a minute, and then he motions me to come by myself. I went to the registrar's office, and he said, tell me your story. And I told him I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. I won the science fair. I did this, all these things. And he said, well, have you applied to Duke? And I said, no, I haven't. He said, well, there are 1,000 students in waiting. This is like Princeton of the South.
Yeah, sure.
There's 1,000 kids waiting to go, and you haven't applied yet. No, I haven't applied. I didn't have a plan.
You didn't even think that was even a possibility for you.
No. And so he looked at me and he asked me about my college board scores and things like that. And then he looked at me again. He reached in his bottom drawer, pulled out his bottom drawer, and handed me an application to Duke University and said, fill this out and get it to me by Monday. I did. And by Friday, I was accepted to Duke University.
So great.
And electrical engineering, and signed up for Air Force ROTC because I was going to go to the war. I just didn't endure the Vietnam War. I was going to go. I had a low draft number. So I decided if I got to go, I might as well go in the Air Force rather than the infantry or something like that. So time comes for me to, after I graduate, I get commissioned. Time comes for me for my assignment. I get assigned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is the mecca for military R&D. I mean, by far.
So now here's where it begins to get really relevant for us. Yes.
And so I go that first day to find out what my duty assignment is. It's going to be 4 years wasted of my time, but 4 years. And I'll go to the personnel, and they look down the list and they say, we can't find you. And I said, well, does that mean I can go home? No, you have your orders, so you're here somewhere. And there's this one little list on his desk that says 12 lieutenants. He said, oh, here you are. You've been assigned to the LEAP program. What is that? He says, you get to work anywhere you want to at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And so they had a flight test wing. And they said, well, we would suggest that you do take the first year and do 3-4 month tours. Those, and then you decide at the end of that first year where you want to go for the rest of the time, or something else, because you carry your slot with you. You're a freebie to these organizations. So I did these things and ended up in flight test, and lo and behold, they made me a flight test engineer. I was a second lieutenant. I knew nothing, and they made me the flight test engineer on this project, testing the electronic intelligence pod on Phantoms. And so that meant I had to go through all the training so I could fly in the Phantoms, ejection seat training and altitude training, all those things. And here I am flying in the back seat of Phantoms and boring holes through the sky and running this equipment. And
so you got your wish. You got up into the sky.
I did. I got into the sky. I bored holes through the sky, went through the Mach, climbed straight up, straight down, did rolls. And half the time the pilot, he was just the driver. I was running all the equipment. And he said, why don't you take it a while? And I'd go fly the airplane and we'd do rolls and loops and things like that. So I decided, this is actually sort of boring.
Wow.
You have some thrills. You have an hour of thrills, that's really cool. But then you spend a lot of time on the ground.
Sure. Waiting
for that hour in the air. And these cockpits are horrible. I mean, who came up with this? It was just the complexity and just you couldn't get bandwidth to and from.
Yeah, early fighter jets were like torture chambers inside the cockpit, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
and pressure suits and all kinds of crazy stuff you'd have to wear and stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah, G suits. G suits are fun. Yeah, when you're pulling G's and squeezes on you to keep the blood up in your brain. So I went back to my second boss and I said, hey, I really want to work on cockpit design because we desperately need that for advanced cockpits. And he said, that's good. We'll get you some test aircraft and some pilots to fly and some money and go at it. And it was clear to me we're never going to get there with the way we were doing it before. You just can't cram any more instruments in the cockpit. Small space. You already have 300 switches, 75 displays, 11 switches on the control stick, 9 switches on the throttle, and you're flying twice the speed of sound and pulling G's, the boundaries of consciousness, and all these things. So there was the head-up display, which is a virtual projection, very narrow virtual projection. I was thinking, what if we could actually make it wider field of view and put it on the helmet? That way you wouldn't take any more. You have to modify the cockpit. And what we use is virtual images. I was I'd done optical physics and things like that. We'd make it a virtual image. You could make it about any size you wanted to. And oh, by the way, we need to know how to track it, where it was aiming, where you're aiming the head. So you do a head tracking thing, and we do this way of generating a virtual image. So I started working on that, and the very first head-mounted sight and head-mounted displays came out of that.
And this is in what time frame? What years was this?
This is in 67, 68.
Got it. So in the heart of the height of the Vietnam War, you're working on this stuff.
Yeah. And so we gravitated toward realizing, and one of the things was sensors. We had these sensors that actually let us see at night, low light level television, large infrared, but there wasn't a display big enough to show that. But with the virtual projection, you could not only see the pixels, but you actually could aim it by aiming your head around. So it's just like you had an infrared window by doing this. So finally we said, well, why can't we put the instruments up there too? Mm-hmm. And this morphed over years to what I call the Super Cockpit. The Super Cockpit was one of the 2 projects selected by Air Force Forecast 2. We were doing the really advanced thinking of a cockpit that you wear. And that's what I was working on when I left the Air Force.
Right. So now if we were in person and we had our swath of listeners from all around the world, I would look at it and say, now are you understanding why he's a legend? Because every piece of that story leads us to all of the things that became this industry and this pursuit of virtual reality. And it's the year 2025 now. You were doing this in the 60s, in the 1960s. You were developing what became the reason that kids all around the world can play Beat Saber today on their Quest 3 is because of you. The reason that theme parks use virtual reality and simulation is because of this path that you took and those various lieutenants and colonels that gave you a shot and said, kid, take a shot at this. Go figure this out. And you saw something that no one else saw was you can't put any more stuff inside this tiny little cockpit. So let's put the cockpit on people's heads. And that became the virtual reality industry. So that's, pioneering.
Well, and also at the time, we haven't talked about this much in the past, but the Super Cockpit basically was not only a virtual projection, a circumambulance of a virtual visual projection. We also had binaural sound in it. Mm-hmm. And we had tactars. We had gloves that had ways to stimulate tactily. And we had R2-D2.
Right.
R2-D2 was actually adapting what you saw in real time based upon your own physiology as well as all the information that's coming in.
It was taking all that sensor data and building it into a database, and it's amazing.
But the real pivot point and that started getting me into transition out of the military was a phone call I got from a general officer in the Pentagon. And he said, Dr. Furness, we need your help. The defense appropriations bill that's coming up, and there's been a lot of negative publicity about the military industrial complex. This is when the news came out that the Army was spending $500 for hammers and the Navy was spending $800 for toilet seats.
Yeah, the toilet, right. The $400 toilet, yeah.
And there's a public outcry, and we're going to get hammered in Congress with funding for the Department of Defense. And he says, usually this is when we unveil something we've been working on, a black airplane or a black ship or, something that's showing the military is really taking care of the citizens, the
distraction,
of the country.
It's a distraction thesis, right? Yes.
So they said, we don't have anything black to unveil, but we have you.
Yeah.
And that cockpit stuff you're working at, that virtual
That's
cockpit
really
stuff
cool.
you're working
so
at.
You were
right
hey,
there.
look over here, kids. This is super cool
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
And so I end up on the CBS Evening News.
Wow.
I did it. They want me to write a press release and hold a press conference. CBS Evening News, Dan Rather's crowd, David Martin, the Pentagon correspondent. Film crew shows up 2 days. I have tape on a lot of the instruments because it's
all classified, right?
Classified.
Yeah.
But so I end up on CBS Evening News, and then after that, ABC had to come, and NBC, and CNN, and CBC, and BBC, and the Australian and television, and I spent a day at the science editor to the New York Times. John Wilford Noble came and spent a day with me. What is this all about? So, and I was writing articles for Popular Mechanics, and we were on the front cover of U.S. News and World Report. After that, I wasn't in R&D anymore. I was in show business.
Right.
But what happened was I started getting phone calls. One of the first phone calls was from a mother. She said, I was watching this program on television where you're talking about this cockpit stuff, and my child has cerebral palsy. Is there anything you can do with this technology to help my child? A surgeon called me and said, I'm a thoracic surgeon, and I'm up to my elbows inside a patient trying to do a graft on aorta. And my map, which is a CT scan, is on a light box on the wall.
Right.
Is there any way you could take that and superimpose it inside the patient?
Right.
Another surgeon said, I want my eyes inside the patient. Can you do that? An anesthesiologist, bunch of anesthesiologists calls it. We need a super cockpit for the operating room, for all the stuff going on, all the electronics and firefighting companies, on and on and on. I was getting 3-4 phone calls a week like this. Can you do that? And my answer to all those questions, well, yeah, actually, that'd be easy to do compared to what I'm trying to do. and that's when I realized, we're onto something really big. And I talked to my leadership, my management about this, and I said, we need to come up with a long-term investment strategy of what to do with this technology. And they said, well, what do you propose? And I said, give me a year off. Give me a sabbatical. A 1-year sabbatical with pay and travel budget. And I want to come up with a long-term plan. So I did. I went everywhere. I went to aerospace companies, to computer companies, to hospitals, to kindergartens, to toy companies, trying to come up with this strategy. And I realized we got to get it out of the military. Because at this time, this was in 1987, the internet didn't exist. But I could see it coming. Because I got to go in through the green door because of my badge, my DOD badge, and found out what was really happening in the background. Telecommunications, computing, so forth. But no one was working on the interface.
Right.
They were working on all this computational technology, but not the interface. And I had the interface for this. And so I came back and said, hey, I want to start a lab somewhere in the U.S. at a university. You've invested a lot in my education, taxpayers have, and start working on applications beyond military.
Right. So this was you giving it all back now. Taking what you learned from the military applications and applying it into all those people from all those other industries that called you and said, I need help with this. I need a way to visualize this.
Yes.
Right.
So I ended up at the University of Washington, made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and brought me in as a full professor with tenure and with a $2 billion startup budget and a new space on campus. And they said, your job is to develop the technology and transition it and start companies and generate patents and things like that. I said, that's exactly what I want to do. And so we spun off 27 companies, started with about 300 patents overall, and raised about $30 million for going into the lab and started an industry because all those kids that are out there running the show, not all of them, but were my kids, my students.
Right.
And those 27 companies were started with students and with inventions and patents like that. So there we were. That's
so
what
in just that about 30 minutes of discussion, our listeners got a master class in the history of virtual reality, why it even exists today. You're a big part of that. Your students were a big part of that. The culture you created, both in the military and the University of Washington, was a part of that. So here's my next logical question. I'm sure Charlie has a lot of them too. When have you seen the most modern output of your creationism in terms of like the current head-mounted wearables that an F-18, a Hornet pilot wears, or an F-22? Because they are incredible. And through my lens, through consumer aviation, I've had the privilege to fly in some Global Express planes that now don't actually even use wearables. They use display technology that reflects on the windshield of the plane. And so, there's like thousands of buttons in these commercial airliners and these very fancy private jets that are all physical. But within an instant, and I've gotten a chance to sit in the cockpit with some of these pilots, they'll push a button and the entire, everything that surrounds them in the physical world is now there in an augmented world on the windshield of the plane itself in 3D and multiple colors, and they can actually see all the telemetry and all this information. So I'm curious, what have your most recent experiences been to see what you started the genesis of and where its output is now in the 2020s?
Well, I helped NASA with the space shuttle, the stuff in they had a display for the space shuttle and for the spacesuits. That they're being used in terms of projecting information.
Right.
That was probably some of the most far out stuff that I'd done. But if you look, it's the F-35 is what you want to look at. The
that's the most advanced,
Lightning.
Right.
That's the most advanced. That you see, look at the helmet there. That's my helmet. That's my cockpit. Basically, that's the cockpit I was working on way back in the day, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And we were actually, test pilots were flying my virtual cockpit, 50 years ago.
Well, there you go.
And so what's advanced, what really is thrilling to me is that we had some real problems back in the day of update rates and delays, latencies, and tracking head position. And it's pretty much been solved. In a headset, I have my MetaQuest 3, all fancy depth. I have it, all kinds of other stuff on it.
Yeah. As you're chatting, I was just pulling up a quick look-see of F-35 virtual cockpit. There's a bunch of YouTube videos of what it looks like through the pilot's eyes. So if our listeners want to see what Tom is talking about, there's a whole bunch of these things, and you can see how advanced this is. Charlie and I often talk about the industrial applications of virtual reality and the actual business of virtual reality. This is the absolute pinnacle of that. Like, how far can you take it in a I don't know what an F-35 costs. How much does it cost? $100 million? I don't know what the plane costs or something like that.
A lot.
But it's a lot. The level of technology that lives inside this virtual wearable cockpit or augmented layer cockpit is kind of incredible. So it's worth for our listeners, just do a search for F-35 virtual cockpit. You'll see a lot of stuff.
But really, the if you want to look at what really VR does, it actually unlocks something inside of us. It unlocks our spatial capability, our spatial memory. And because it takes things highly symbolic and then sorts them out into something that has a place. Because when you put on a headset, it's like somebody pulls you out of the real world where you are and into another place. So you think about it as a place. And because of that, the bandwidth to the brain is energized.
Right. It's exponentially much more.
Exponentially, because you're using way more of your capacity, because we're dumbing down our vision with these old systems. And along with that is an acceleration of your ability to learn and make decisions, and you never forget it. The beauty of it, this is part of my mantra, it's like the difference between watching a TV program of Disneyland versus going to Disneyland.
Right.
And because you never forget going to Disneyland.
Yeah, because it's actually spatial memory. It builds in the three-dimensional space of your brain. Yeah.
And the impact, and I've been at the University of Washington. We did nine studies of the use of virtual reality for education. Unbelievable results, especially with kids people had written off as slow learners.
Right.
It's not they were slow learners, they were just wired differently. And they caught up with the smart kids, and a year later when we tested them, they were better than the smart kids, the kids that were making A's. So it is a tool that unlocks capability we've always had, but we haven't been able to use it, and interacting especially with computers. So that's really the thing. That's
Charlie,
really what
this is great. I mean, I'm just like
Pure
a kid in a
gold.
candy store.
So, Tom, as Ted just said, it's been great listening to your story. And now we're in the present day. And you're an emeritus professor now. You're not teaching every day. You know, you've founded so many companies and created such a great institution at the University of Washington. What are you're not a retirer.
No, I'm not. Well, I can't. My wife won't let me. I flunked retirement.
I tried twice. It didn't count for me either.
No. So she says, if you want to stay married to me, you gotta
get out of the house.
But I've been having a lot of fun with the Virtual World Society. And I started that the first one I started in 93, and I redid it again in 2015. But it's grown, and now Alvin Grayland is the chairman of the board of that.
I see his book behind your right ear.
Yeah, I have a little part in that book.
Yeah, and he and Louis Rosenberg wrote a wonderful book. We've had Alvin on the show. The book's called Our Next Reality. I wholly recommend it.
Yeah,
and Alvin, of course, is a tremendous guy.
Yeah. Well, he was one of my students.
I know.
Way back at the day, when he was actually
quick.
undergraduate.
He's quick to credit you.
Yes, he's a good kid. Yeah, but he's a kid. You know, he's one of these kids.
I know those guys in their 40s. They don't know what's
That's
going
right.
on.
They're just kids.
Yeah, but really, what's exciting me now is this notion of a light school. It's a flight school for the heart and mind and spirit. And so taking the VR and with some sensors of measuring radiance, photons that are coming out of the body, measuring in our cells in real time, and using that as biofeedback, in addition to experiences that teach us unconditional love. That's, to me, is where I will when I cash in, that's what I want to have done. And that's what the light schools. We have about 50 folks. We made an announcement the last AWE that we're going to do this, the Virtual World Society, the light school. And it really is so exciting because we have so much capability. We are the last frontier. It's not out there in space. It's not in the oceans. It's us. We have so much capability we're not using. We have those 47 trillion cells inside of us. Each one of those cells is an antenna to the quantum field that receives and transmits. We think our brain is what it's all about. It isn't. It's our whole self, including the spiritual side of ourselves and our mind, but our mind needs a little reconditioning.
So would you say light school is kind of the intersection of humanity and virtual reality, or?
Yeah. I think so. I think that this is the idea. My goal in all of this is to take the headset off.
3D without glasses.
And so you don't need it anymore because we use this as training wheels so that we can be all that we can be. And so we take it off. We don't need it anymore because we already have the capability. We have unlocked the capability we've always had.
Wow, that's a great place to end the podcast today. Tom, thank you. Always great to see you. And of course, we look forward to seeing you again at AWE.
Absolutely.
The year goes by so quickly. How does it get faster? There's another physics question for you.
Well, there's another thing to think about. When we're talking about the quantum field and quantum consciousness, there is no time.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody.
I will, for all our listeners listening around the world, I will say a global collective thank you to Tom. Everybody should say thank you to you. And if they're not doing it physically, I'm doing it for them. So thank you for being you. Thank you for allowing your journey to be shared with so many others in such a wonderful North Carolina way. And we really appreciate it. It's great. Great having you on the show.
It's been fun.
All right.
Great to
Have
see
a good
you
one,
guys.
everybody. We'll see you right back here next week.